Well, good afternoon, young people. It's so good to see you all, and thank you for coming back after your lunch. It seems that the lunch has been too generous this afternoon. And if you go deep into chemistry, when you eat a good lunch, large amounts of insulin will be released in your blood to consume all the sugars. But you know that insulin also has an effect to put you to sleep. So there are some saints who are at rest, but you are the saints of the saints. And thank you for coming. We'll have a very relaxed time, a very friendly time. And first of all, I would like to thank the group which was singing today with Pastor. I find it hard to pronounce your name, but I'll learn it over time. You see, your group is so fabulous. When we came here, and we were just waiting for 10, 15 minutes for the faithful remnant to arrive here. And you were singing so nicely. It was so pleasant just to be in your atmosphere. The way you sing and play and perform is worth driving 1,000 kilometers just to have a look. One song is worth going a long way. So God bless you, and also Gilson College Church. Whatever you do is full of nobility and splendor. God bless you abundantly. Well, my presentation for you this afternoon is Finding the Best Coach. Let us go to the first book of Kings in the Old Testament, and we're looking at two well-known personalities, Elijah and Elisha. 1 Kings 19, verses 19 to 21. So imagine Elijah the prophet, a man who never tasted death. And there he is, going around Israel after his triumph, the victory on Mount Carmel. And then he flees to a strange land, afraid of Jezebel. Then he comes back. And there comes a very interesting moment in his life. 1 Kings 19, verses 19 to 21. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." "Go back," Elijah replied. "What have I done to you?" So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his attendant. This looks like a very paradoxical experience. Now, have you noticed how many oxen did Elisha have on the field? 12. Now, in those days, if you had 12 cows or 12 oxen, it meant you were a wealthy man. It's like today when we arrived in the morning at Gilson College, and we looked at hundreds of cars in the back on the oval. My younger son Alex, who likes the models of cars, he said, "Dad, look how many Mercedes cars they've got here." Because at Avondale Memorial Church, where I've been working as pastor for the last 8 years, we may find 1 or 2 Mercedes cars on a given Sabbath. And Alex said, "Look, Dad, there's a Mercedes car, there's a Mercedes car." I said, "Well, Alex, this is the city of Melbourne. People here, they probably earn a little bit more money, and that's why they have more Mercedes cars." But it's a good thing, because I think those people are great supporters of the church as well. But Elisha, in this case, is a wealthy man. He is a farmer, evidently having a good income. And also, from what we see here, he is a hard worker. He is working the field. And Elijah comes to him and just puts his clothes on top of him. And Elisha is first puzzled, confused. He wants to go and say goodbye to his mom and dad. Elisha evidently knows who Elijah is. This is a man who is very special. He's a prophet of God. He has a special fame because he defeated 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And Elisha, on one hand, he's rich and wealthy. On the other hand, he has something special about his heart. Deep in his heart, he is fully committed to the Lord God of Israel. So he becomes, from being a wealthy farmer, an attendant of a man who had to rely on ravens for food. And then they travel for many years. And Elisha over the years is learning many things from Elijah. And the main thing was his connection, his relationship with the Lord. And now let us look at the goodbye experience. 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 9 to 14. So let's skip several years of their journey together and look at 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 9 to 14. The story here is preceded by several mentionings of multiple prophets. There is a prophetic movement. They go to one place, there are 50 prophets. They go to another place, there's another 50 prophets. Go to a third place and find another 50 prophets. So in the days of Elijah in Israel, what you and I may find is a prophetic movement. There was a time of great spiritual revival. And here in 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 9 onwards, it says, "When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, 'Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you? Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit.' Elisha replied, 'You have asked a difficult thing,' Elijah said. 'Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it'll be yours. Otherwise not.' As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, 'My father, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel.' And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them apart. He picked up the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak that had fallen from him and struck what? Struck the water with it. 'Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?' he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. So here is another experience. In 1 Kings chapter 19, there's the first meeting and the beginning of a discipleship journey. You all bear in mind that a Victorian Conference has a dream of nurturing, breeding, and excelling as a disciple-making movement, thriving as a disciple-making movement. So here is an experience of discipleship. At first, the disciple is invited, and you may find in the text that clothes are involved. Elijah is putting his clothes on Elisha and says, "Come and follow me." And at the end of their journey together, when they bid goodbye to each other and Elijah is taken in a chariot, clothes again are mentioned. Elisha is getting rid of his clothes, and now he's going to wear Elijah's clothes, the clothes of the prophet. And if you look at the life of Elisha, 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 after the departure of Elijah, you will notice that his ministry was even greater than Elijah's ministry. In actual fact, we don't have a lot from Elijah's life. All we have is just a few encounters with King Ahab. You find his journey to Zarephath. You find the Mount Carmel experience and the miracle burning of the sacrifice. You find many things. But if you look at Elisha's life, it seems that it is having a greater scope, much larger geography. Elisha, just like Elijah the prophet, is raising the dead, because both Elijah raised the dead and Elisha raises the dead. He even when he dies, his bones seem to possess the rising power, because you remember when that man was dropped into Elisha's tomb, he was raised, which is the symbol of the future resurrection of Christ. He has healing power. He heals people. He rebukes the kings. You remember the experience with the Syrian commander who had to go and plunge himself into the Jordan 7 times. You find that Elisha's life is a great reflection and the most splendid and magnificent expansion of Elijah's life. He is a bright example of finding the right coach, following the coach, and doing much more and better than the coach could ever achieve. Now, you may look at the experience in the life of Jesus Christ. You remember when John is writing the farewell speech of Jesus in the Gospel of John, there's an interesting text. It's John chapter 14, verse 12. I remember this text from my teenage times when I was making my first steps to Christ, because that text was actually my foundation text for my entry sermonette to the seminary. Because when I was entering the seminary as one of our exams, we had to deliver a 10-minute sermonette. So John 14, verse 12 was my text. So here in John chapter 14, verse 12, it says, "I tell you the truth. Anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father." So Jesus says, all of you who believe will do greater things. And if you look at the life of Jesus, his ministry was limited by Israel. Just a small land of roughly 400 kilometers from north to south, and anywhere between 50 to 100 kilometers from east to west. Just a small portion of land. But if you look at the followers of Jesus, they go beyond where Jesus went, all of the Middle East. And Paul the Apostle, who was converted on the road to Damascus, here manages in his lifetime, in just several missionary journeys, to cover with the gospel message most of the Mediterranean and the major parts and the major cities of the Roman Empire. You find that Jesus was the best coach who ever lived. And the people he coached for a number of years, they were the miracles of God's grace. And many of them did greater things than even Jesus did, humanly speaking. Of course, nobody can surpass what Jesus did on the cross, the Son of God, the incarnate God himself, by dying for the sins of the world. But humanly speaking, as far as mission is concerned, his disciples, and Paul in particular, who was not an official disciple during his lifetime, they did even greater things. Look at Paul's letters. How many letters did Paul leave us? Romans, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians. You've got 2 Thessalonians. You've got 2 Timothy, 2 letters to Timothy. You've got Titus. You've got the letter to Philemon. Some theologians ascribe Hebrews to Paul. He was a great theologian, great philosopher, and the great author of the New Testament. So you find that discipleship and coaching and training are very important. You find it everywhere in the world. Take the world of sports. When I was a little boy, I was watching the Winter Olympic Games in Seoul in 1988. And I was watching the figure skating competition, where the battle was between the 3 great figure skaters, Brian Boitana from the United States, Brian Orser from Canada, and also Dmitry Petrenko from the Soviet Union. So they battled with each other in the short program, and then when they went into the final program, in the so-called long program, Boitana, who was an underdog, he scored the golden medal, and Brian Orser scored the silver medal, and then the Soviet Petrenko came third. It's interesting to notice that Orser, who tried to win a golden medal twice, in 1984 in Sarajevo, Yugoslavia, and then in 1988 in Seoul, Orser scored 2 silver medals. He never achieved it. He never made it to the golden podium. But when he left figure skating, he decided to become a coach and coach athletes. And today in the figure skating world, he's considered to be possibly the best coach. He prepared the modern legend of figure skating, the Japanese skater Yuzuru Hanyu, who now does things absolutely unfathomable. If you check it on YouTube and online, you will be surprised at what this young Japanese boy does. He found the right coach with world championship and Olympic experience. And he was coached by him. In the days of Brian Orser, they could spin 3 times. And Boitana in 1988 was the first one who could spin, do the so-called tulip jump of 4 times. It was a four-time one. Today, they do 4 times, several times during their performance. Coaching and discipleship are important in all spheres and levels of life. Let me share just a little bit with you about my experience of how coaching played an important role in my development. When people ask me today at Avondale Memorial, Vadim, who was your best mentor in your pastoral ministry? And I tell them, well, my mentor mentored me long before I became a Christian and a Seventh-day Adventist. And I think his example and his influence in my life helped me become a better pastor. And when I was a teenager, I was not a very strong boy. And in fact, I was a weak boy physically. At school, I was bullied quite severely. And it is for that reason that I had to spend several years learning different martial arts like judo and boxing. And when I was in the boxing club, I had a coach. But my coach in the boxing club was an unusual coach. He was a coach who knew every athlete by their names. He knew where they lived. And he was a very caring coach. If someone was missing at the training session, he would always ask a question, where is he? Is he going okay? If he knew that that athlete was in the hospital, he would go buy some fruit, some candy, and he would actually go and visit the athlete in hospital. When he knew that there was an athlete who needed to advance in his competitions, and let's go to the European Championship or even higher, he would go to different industries and businesses and negotiate. I've got an athlete, he needs sponsorship. And he actually would look for sponsorship for that athlete to go and perform on a high level. And he spent a lot of time with his students personally, answering their questions. When I became a Christian at the age of 15, I left boxing because I could no longer feel it was my Christian conscience to continue hitting people in the head. I just could not combine my boxing experience and my Christian experience. And in a couple of months after my departure from the boxing club, my coach started sending students, and they came to me and they brought a letter in which he wrote, Vadim, maybe I offended you in any way. Maybe I did something wrong to you, my coach was writing to me. Please forgive me. Come back to the club. We love you. We need you. So he was so nice to me even after my departure. And he kept sending me letters and kept looking for me for months and months and months. That's how caring he was. So today when people ask me, who influenced you the most in my pastoral experience? Well, I tell them my boxing coach. Because in my church, I tried to look after my people like my boxing coach was looking after his athletes. If I see that there's someone who is skilled and talented and he wants to go and run an evangelistic program somewhere, locally in Australia or overseas, go to Africa or Papua New Guinea, I'll go and look for some money for them and try to get a budget so that this young person could go and run the program and preach the gospel. If someone is sick, I would definitely try to go and find the first opportunity to visit them in hospital and pray with those people. My coach in boxing coached me on how to become a minister. I'm the luckiest man on earth. I'm the happiest man on earth because in my life's journey, spiritually, emotionally, physically, career-wise, I was mentored by a lot of very good instructors and coaches. When I first became an Adventist Christian and I was in the church, we were a small church of roughly 40 or 50 members at that time. And the local church pastor said, look, we have some young people. We've got 5 or 6 young people. And then he told the church, why don't we train them as preachers? Why don't we give them all an opportunity to train? And let's do this thing. We'll assign an experienced church member to every one of those young people and we'll ask them to train them how to give a Sabbath school lesson and how to speak. I was assigned to a lady who happened to be a gymnastics coach. She was coming to church. She was a believer, had lots of children. Her husband worked in the police. And she invited me to her house and she would study the Sabbath school lesson with me, and then she would sit in front of me when I was trying to deliver the Sabbath school lesson from the pulpit to my church. I was very scared. Can you imagine? I was getting on the pulpit and trying to put my thoughts together, put my notes together, and there's my coach sitting in front of me, smiling at me. And I was very excited, very scared. But she, that woman, kept mentoring me for at least a year, until she was confident I could prepare Sabbath school lessons myself, and I could prepare my first sermons myself. I was so happy that from the very beginning that I was converted as a Christian, I had someone to mentor and instruct me in my ways. And later in 1993, I was invited by the local conference to come and work as a translator. In those days, in 1990s, in Russia and Ukraine and the countries of the former Soviet Union, hundreds of American and Australian and New Zealand evangelists came, and they did programs and opened new areas, new territories, new cities. And of course, they needed translators, they needed interpreters. And because I knew a little bit of English since childhood, because I was studying at school with extensive English learning, I was sent to one of those programs. And when I arrived, I was very scared because I never translated before. I never read the English Bible from A to Z. I knew only some chapters. And yet my preacher, his name was Ron Priest from the state of Washington. He happened to be a full-time evangelist in the Washington conference at that time. He said, "Vadim, don't worry. We'll do our best so that you could translate for me well." So in the morning we would meet, and he would go through his sermon with me, and I would translate it out loud, check with him different terms and words, because for me as a young Christian, many terms at that time many English language terms were strange. For example, the word Lord's Supper. I thought it was the supper of the Lords, you know, the English Lords. It was not the supper of our Lord Jesus Christ, it was the supper of the Lords, Lord's Supper. And I would think, okay, it's where the English Lords sup together. Many biblical English terms I did not understand, and I was wondering how to pronounce different words, like, for example, Nebuchadnezzar. I used to pronounce it Nebuchadnezzar because I thought it was CH should be pronounced as Ch. Nebuchadnezzar he was. And but that preacher was very patient with me. In the afternoon, after lunch, he would sit down with me and he would go through the topic again. And in the evening, at the main program, when we would stand in front of hundreds of people, I was well versed, well prepared after 2 rehearsals, and I would be able to just put my life, soul, and all the eloquence that the Russian language could provide. We had a wonderful time together, and I remember after that program when we asked the people to raise their hands if they want to get baptized, and there was literally a forest of hands, and we left the stage because the preacher couldn't hold his feelings. He was crying. He said, "I can't believe what I see." 305 people got baptized in a few days in the Volga River. But what I do remember is that preacher, during that month that I was spending with him, he spent so much time with me. We walked around the city. I was asking him multiple questions. I thought any human being would not survive such a nasty tale which follows you everywhere. But I was young. I was passionate about my faith. I wanted to become a minister, and I was draining all the juices out of this minister. But he was patient with me. He was in his mid-40s, had a nice family, girls who came with him from America. But because he spent so much time with me, he planted the right seeds in my heart. And since that time, just in a little while, by the provision of the Lord, I became a full-time conference evangelist. And what he was doing in America, now I was doing in Russia. I again managed to have the right coach. Often your coaches may not be the easiest to deal with. Once, by the provision of the Lord, my destiny collided me with an Australian preacher, Pastor John Carter. Now, have you ever heard about John Carter? Okay, John Carter is known to be a person who is very good as a public preacher, but he's a little bit capricious in personal relationships. But he's very demanding. Everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be up to the millimeter. I never realized that I would spend actually 16 years as his translator every year when he would come, and spend at least 1 month every year translating for John Carter in my country. And on one hand, John was tough when it came to his demanding personality, because he required excellence in all things. I had to learn to translate as if I were the second tongue of John Carter. Basically, the translation had to be swift, and he would also use a lot of English idioms, and idiomatic expressions may not always be translated instantly into a foreign language. Well, he demanded that I would create an idiom to his idiom straight there on the spot. Okay, and he would preach very fast and with lots of dynamics, and which put a lot of stress on me. Sveta, why are you laughing? Do you know John Carter? All right. Will you mind if I show you the way we used to preach, okay, in two languages, in English and Russian. So basically, for instance, John 3:16. For God so loved the world, ибо так возлюбил Бог мир, that He gave His only Son, что отдал Сына Своего Единородного, that whosoever believeth in Him, дабы всякий верующий в Него should not perish, не погиб, but have everlasting life, но имел жизнь вечную. So that was the speed and dynamics with which John was requiring me to translate for him, okay? So on one hand, it was tough and stressful. On the other hand, I'm sorry if I spoke too loud and blew your eardrums, but I blew up mine too. But on the other hand, I'm grateful to the Lord for putting me with someone who was not always the most convenient person. But he taught me many good things. He taught me the excellence of preaching. He taught me the excellence of organization, that everything has to work like a clock, everything has to be the best. If we want, basically John Carter's biggest lesson that he taught me over the years is that if you want to do evangelism, if you want to do soul winning, you must be better than the world. You must be the best of the best. Everything has to be the best and the most excellent. So was he a tough coach? Yes, he was. Was he a good one? Yes, he was. So I'm asking you a question today. My brothers and sisters, who is your coach today? Or do you even have one? Is your coach someone in your church congregation who is a church politician? Well, if your coach is a church politician, you'll become an expert church politician too. Maybe your coach in your church is a professional gossiper. By the way, do you know who gossipers in the churches are? A gossiper is the best evangelist. He doesn't even know about that, okay? Because a gossiper is a person who miraculously can spread gossips very quickly. You know, you just share it with him and tell him, I tell you a secret, but make sure that you don't tell it to anyone, okay? Even 5 minutes, everybody knows about that. Remember, you met the best evangelist of all. Because if that person used his gossip skills to spread the gospel, then all of Melbourne would know about the gospel in 1 week. But if that gossiper persists on gossiping and he becomes your coach, well, you might end up being a professional gossiper too. What is your training all about? What are you learning and training for in the church? Is that your church training you to be a champion in soul winning? Well, my suggestion for you this afternoon, it's very simple. Look for good coaches and look for the best coaches. And if you want to excel in ministry, discipleship is an important element in ministry. If you have a lot of experience, don't hold it to yourself. Share it with others. Give it away. Often it may be stressful. My father never made it to be the best of my coaches. My father was a man who could do all things with his hands. My father could, in all of my childhood, I don't remember my father going and doing somewhere with a specialist, whether it's fixing the car or fixing furniture, any mechanical things. My father is such a great handy. And as a child, I was dreaming of doing what my father was doing, but my father would seldom find time to show it to me and show me how to do it. Once I finally persuaded him to take me with him to fix a car and fix the pistons and the cylinders, do the engine repair. And as we were standing there, my father was a very silent man. He was actually silent for 6 hours. And finally, when a bolt dropped into the piston, he said something nasty, and that was the only word he uttered in the whole day. I was helping, but I was learning very little. Because my dad is an introvert. He is not a person who is very willing to share and talk and give it away. And in ministry, some things like this happen too. Often pastors, elders, mature church members find it difficult to find opportunities and times to actually give away their knowledge. their potential to other people, especially the young people. So my earnest plea and request for all of us, if you have something to give, ask the Lord to give you patience, give you mind and wisdom to share it and give it away. That is essential if you want to thrive at this disciple-making movement. If you want to train, and if you want to become a better servant of Jesus, a better minister, then pray that the Lord will send you the right coach. And He definitely shall. Because there's no desire in the mind of Jesus, no greater desire than to finish the proclamation of the gospel on this planet. Come back and take His children home. And all the heavenly armies, all the heavenly resources are in your disposal if you ask for that. And if you ask the Lord, Lord, I want to be a better minister for you. I want to be a better servant for you. I want to be a better priest in the royal priesthood of all believers. Please send me the right coach or the right coaches to train me. Believe me, God will send you the right one. Looking for the right coach. Let us pray that God will send us such good people. Dear Father in heaven, I want to thank you for the fact that the Bible is full of bright and beautiful fellowship examples. And we're asking all of us that you'll train us and equip us all to be better ministers for you. Whether we're professional ministers or we're just church members, we're asking that you'll give us the vision that we're all part of a royal priesthood of all believers. And we're praying that you'll make us all better ministers. And we're praying for the state of Victoria and Melbourne in particular, that you'll pour your Holy Spirit upon this place and let the sacred gospel of Jesus come to every home and reach every heart. In the name of Jesus Christ.